Welcome to all joining us today for our webinar on key elements of recovery and recovery-oriented services. We're happy to have you today. Looks like there are a few people still joining, but we'll go ahead and get started. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Ann Murphy, and I'm the co-director of this center and an associate professor here at Rutgers, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. We encourage you to visit the MHTTC network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. We also have our center's website at the end of the webinar today. If you can change slides for me. Thank you so much. So we'd love for you to sign up to receive our emails to hear about our upcoming trainings, webinars, and learning communities. We'll be launching a couple new learning communities starting in February, and we'll be sending out announcements about those in January. So if you want to learn about our additional services and resources, please sign up to receive our emails. Next slide. Thanks. We have, this is the first webinar in a series of webinars that we have going on over the next 6 or 7 months or so. Today's webinar is on recovery and an overview of recovery-oriented services. And then what we have coming up is every few weeks, we have a webinar dedicated to the evidence-based recovery-oriented practices so that you can learn more about those. So coming up in the next month, we have a webinar that'll be dedicated to supported employment and followed by supported education, supportive housing, illness management, recovery, peer-provided services. And then after that, we'll talk about supervision of peer providers, the role of health and wellness in recovery. We'll have a webinar on the role of religion and spirituality in recovery. And then we'll have a webinar dedicated to recovery within the Hispanic and Latinx community. We'll be posting links to register for these webinars in the chat box. So if you're interested in signing up to participate in those webinars, you can register through those links that we'll post. You can also sign up for our emails and you'll get information about those webinars and links to register as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping here. As our funding comes from SAMHSA, we are required to evaluate our services. So we just wanted to let you know that at the conclusion of this webinar, you'll receive an email from us with a link to a very, very brief survey. And when I say brief, I mean very brief. It should take you no more than 1 to 2 minutes at most to complete the survey. That gives us helpful feedback, and it also lets SAMHSA know that you're participating in our events, and that helps to ensure that we continue to get funding to be able to provide these services. So keep an eye out for that, and we would very much appreciate you completing it. We also wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. So the recording will be posted to our website after the conclusion of the webinar. And I did also want to let you know that we will be sending out at the conclusion of the webinar the slides that are used here. So you'll have access to the slides, and then on our website will be the recording and the slides. We also wanted to let you know that this will be an interactive webinar, so there'll be some opportunities to utilize chats and polls throughout the webinar, so please just keep an eye out for that. Our presenter will give you some instructions as those come up. And you also have the opportunity to use the Q&A button that is on either the top or bottom of your screen, depending how it's set up. It says Q&A. If you click on that, there'll be the opportunity for you to submit a question to myself and to the presenter. And there will be time at the end of the webinar for us to address those questions. You can also post questions in the chat box. Okay, so now to begin, so our webinar today, again, key elements of recovery and recovery-oriented services. Our presenter today is Joni Dolce. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers School of Health Professions. Joni has several years of experience working in behavioral healthcare settings, particularly supported employment. Joni teaches courses in the department's undergraduate program, as well as providing training and technical assistance to behavioral healthcare providers. Her research interests include staff training and employment services. She presents nationally on the topic of employment services and is listed as a Society for Human Resource Management recommended speaker on the topic of creating workplaces that support mental health. She has a long career in recovery-oriented services, and we're very happy to have her here with us today to present. So welcome, Joni, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anne. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to do the webinar today. In New Jersey, it's a nice, sunny, blue sky, so hopefully where you are, it's equally as nice. So today's webinar, as Anne mentioned, will really focus on identifying some of those key elements of recovery. We're also going to look at the difference between clinical and personal recovery. And finally, we're going to look at what those services and practices are that support recovery. And as Anne mentioned, throughout the webinar, I'll be eliciting feedback, maybe have some chats throughout, and a couple of different polls that are just really simple polls that I'll pull up, and you'll answer some multiple choice questions. Recovery from serious mental illness has been studied and documented by researchers, practitioners, and individuals with lived experience around the world and across time. Recovery is real and can be supported by the practices and services that encourage participant engagement, community inclusion, valued social roles, and overall wellness. So let's get started. And our first poll, which I'll bring up, is really looking at, oh, sorry. Oops, let me just bring this. For some reason, my second poll is coming up. Oh, here it is. Okay, so when we talk about recovery, it's really important to hear what recovery means to the person examining recovery. So what does recovery mean to you? So choose more than one answer. You can choose 1, 2, 3, as many answers as you want, and we'll have a discussion. So the options are the absence of symptoms, a journey of healing and transformation, a step-by-step linear process, a process unique to the individual, and living a satisfying life. So we'll give a few more minutes for the polling. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people, 85% identified, or we have 85% of the responses in a journey of healing and transformation, an absence of symptoms, really low, 4%. It looks like a process unique to the individual and living a satisfying life are equal, and a step-by-step linear process really got a fairly small amount of votes as well. This is really designed to allow you to see that all of these, except that step-by-step linear process, are all characteristics of recovery and have been discussed and examined in the literature and through first-person accounts. So even the absence of symptoms is considered an aspect of recovery to some individuals. So we're going to go in and talk about what some of these characteristics are and what some of the literature and a little tiny bit about the research and what it shows us about recovery. So William Anthony is one of probably the first, or certainly instrumental in studying recovery early on. He, along with Pat Deegan, who is a consumer advocate and also a recovery theorist, who we'll talk about a little bit more later on in the morning or the afternoon, she and Bill Anthony really were the beginning and very instrumental in crafting a recovery-oriented system. He talks about how recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond that catastrophic effect of the mental illness. So it may be for some the absence of symptoms. It may be for some going back to work or going back to school, but it's moving on from that catastrophe of the illness itself and some of the symptoms of the illness. So just to kind of prime us to also begin looking at the difference between clinical and personal recovery. So as we mentioned in the poll, the absence of symptoms could be considered an element of recovery. It's certainly part of that clinical recovery. Improved symptoms, reduced stays in hospital, using clinical services much less frequently, reduction in medication. The literature and individuals with the lived experience have also promoted personal recovery over the last several decades through consumer advocacy and empowerment. And through these first-person accounts, the mental health field has become more aware of the importance of recovery and the key elements that comprise recovery. It's not just a lack of symptoms or service utilization, but it's really living a full and satisfying life, even with symptoms or other effects of the mental illness. So it certainly can include those more clinical recovery outcomes, but it doesn't have to just be those clinical. We have two individuals in the chat box. Okay. It looks like the chat was something outside of what we're talking about. So the Vermont longitudinal study really does help us better understand that clinical recovery and those clinical outcomes. So Courtney Harding and her colleagues years ago studied individuals over a course of 30 years. This study really looked at people who were being discharged from a state hospital. And these were individuals who were in some of the most confined areas of the hospital. Throughout this research project, she examined individuals at different time points and identified that 83% of the individuals had not been in the hospital for the past year. She also noted that about 3/4 of the study participants had close friends, half were employed, and about 3/4 led a full to moderate life. This was really that monumental study in the US that provided evidence to the contrary of what was the general sentiment at the time. The general thought was that people with mental health conditions got worse over time, and there was little hope for improvement, and that people typically lived out their entire lives in hospitals and other care settings. So these findings were really important to the field. It provided optimism and hope and really informed some of those practice principles that we're going to talk about later on, and gave people and some level of hope that they're not just resigned to living in hospital settings. And these findings have been replicated throughout different countries and over the last 30 years since Courtney Harding's study, and even prior to that. And each of these studies have really shown that recovery is possible. Similar results have been found, that rather than having this deteriorating course, different mental health conditions like schizophrenia, there was a suggestion through these research projects that people can improve, and remission or recovery is much more common than we originally thought. So let's look at another quick poll. About this Vermont study. So what percentage of study participants do you think showed slight or no symptoms at the follow-up? Was it 12%, 27%, 72%, or 94%? So I'll share the results. It looks like half of you identified 27%. It's actually 72%. So that's a really high number, when at the time, and even now, sometimes the prognosis is looked at as people never get better, people's symptoms do not improve. Well, this study showed improvement, and this study allowed the field to really begin believing that people improved. And Courtney Harding further illustrates this in some of the writings that she and her colleagues have written since then, that really talked about chronic illness, as she identifies it, may be viewed as having less to do with this inherent natural outcome of the disorder and more to do with all of the environmental and other psychosocial factors interacting with the person and the illness. Meaning, a lot of this is based on not just this natural course of someone getting progressively more ill or progressively increasing symptoms, but people do recover, and some of these people were recovering aside from interventions and support. Certainly people did have supports outside of the hospital and services that were promoting some of these features of recovery-oriented services, but a lot of this had to do more with just the natural course of the illness. So again, giving us hope in the field that recovery is possible. So we explored some of the more hard research, the longitudinal studies conducted by Courtney Harding, and there have been several since then and even prior. But there are also some autobiographical perspectives and first-person accounts that look at common themes. And Pat Deegan is a consumer advocate in the field. If you're familiar with the field of mental health and psychiatric rehabilitation, Dr. Deegan is one of the key advocates for consumers and for recovery-oriented services. She's done a lot to advance the field, and she talks about recovery as a process, not an outcome. She further describes it as a way of life or an attitude, and this idea of small steps and small beginnings. So in the poll that we had early on when I asked about your idea of recovery, that a step-by-step linear process isn't always necessarily the case. People aren't necessarily taking these step-by-step processes for recovery. It may not be as linear as that, but it does certainly always begin with a small step. And Dr. Deegan writes for her a lot of that centered around work and that small step of returning to school and having something, as she describes, to organize her recovery around, and that was work. Priscilla Ridgway talks about the uniqueness of recovery and how each person's journey is unique, and taking small, concrete steps. So again, that idea of taking that small step forward, that process, it's not just going to happen overnight. It's not just going to be an absence of symptoms, but taking some small steps towards that. And Mary Ellen Copeland and Sherry Mead, again, two recovery advocates, have also identified small steps as a common theme to recovery. So when we're working with individuals or we're providing services, we really want to create opportunities for people to take small steps and to be able to feel that success each time they take a small step and build that self-efficacy. It's something that's been a theme in the literature, that recovery is built on these small steps. Another common theme in the autobiographical perspectives are really focused about providers and systems that promote choice and independence. So providers that offer opportunities for people to make their own decisions, provide options, provide choices, having that information available and the resources so that people can make informed decisions. And the idea of role models. So having peers and other individuals who have gone through similar processes or gone through similar challenges, coming back and helping. So having that provider and system that really does promote this choice and independence. And as we go through the webinar, really consider how you and your organization promotes this idea of choice and independence. And we'll talk a little bit more about other key factors that are evident in recovery-oriented services, but just begin thinking, and we'll have a brief discussion at the end. How are you creating these systems and services that really are based on choices and options and opportunities? Priscilla Ridgway, again, a consumer advocate. She's writes extensively about recovery. She's with Yale's Recovery and Community Health Center, and she's also written the book, The Pathways to Recovery. Dr. Ridgway talks about recovery as a journey, moving from areas of despair to hope, denial to acceptance and understanding, this idea of withdrawing from life and withdrawing from activities to actively engaging and participating, passive adjustment to active participation. So being part of your treatment, being part of the recovery, having this prescribed treatment and moving from that to support and partnership. So a lot of shared decision-making comes out of these themes of moving to a more partner-oriented role and a more supportive role with individuals. So helping people that we're working with or helping the individuals that you're providing services with learn how to partner with their psychiatrist or learn how to provide input into the services that they're receiving. Encouraging that and also providing real tangible support to help people learn those skills. So some of the common themes that, again, have developed out of some qualitative literature, also these first-person accounts, are really looking at autonomy, helping people to be independent, learn the skills to be more independent and make their own decisions. Housing is a big one. Housing, helping people find safe and affordable housing. When someone has an environment, a living environment that's safe and stable, that seems to be related to recovery. Employment is a big one. And again, Pat Deegan writes about her attachment to employment and how work for her, or going back to school, was that what she needed to organize her recovery around. So sometimes having that job or going back to school, knowing that you need to perform in certain settings, can help you access other areas of wellness. Being socially connected, so helping someone connect with family if that's a possibility, or others in their community. being part of treatment decisions, really making sure that people know how to talk with providers, you're teaching people skills to have discussions with psychiatrists, have discussions with other therapists or other people who are part of the treatment team. That's something that we as providers, regardless of what position you're in, can really have a huge impact, really teaching those skills, whether it's through role playing or helping someone develop a script, whatever that might be, having that shared decision making, even looking and doing some searches on shared decision making. They have a lot of tools available on some of the different websites. Pat Deegan has some information and resources that are part of the shared decision making model. I would certainly suggest following up with that. Helping people resume that control, again, that's being part of the treatment decisions. Overcoming stigma, helping people look at those internalized stigma areas that people have been stigmatized for so long, helping people to really look at how to manage that internalized stigma, how to help people develop self-efficacy or develop confidence to move forward and move ahead with other areas of their life. And again, going back to employment and housing, helping people to identify safe, stable housing, helping people to look at what their skills, interests, values, and work preferences are to find a job that would be a good match. Exercising citizenship. This helping people vote, helping people advocate, helping people find sources of opportunities to advocate for laws and regulations that might affect them, whether it's affecting that person because of their mental health condition or in other areas, but helping and facilitating some of those access to getting a driver's license, getting a vote, registering to vote, all of that. And finally, renewing hope. Bill Anthony writes that a lot of times that common denominator of recovery is the presence of people who believe in and stand by the person in need of recovery. So I love that quote because I think that really speaks to us as people and family members and loved ones of people who might who have a mental health condition, but also as providers and sometimes helping people and believing in them. And a lot of times that comes from having those expectations and helping people learn how to get back to work and go back to school or identify social opportunities in their communities. So some of the old and existing system messages have been that this is a lifelong disorder, that people are in the role of patient, not the role of someone on a journey of recovery. There have been a lack of positive role models. So there have been very few people in the system, in the old system, and quite frankly, in some of the existing services that are out there of individuals who are in recovery, of individuals who are living lives and have valued social roles in the community. So consider how, again, your organization can focus on creating opportunities for individuals that you're serving or working with to have positive role models. Maybe that looks like having people come back and talk to a group or talk to individuals one-on-one or however that might be, some sort of mentorship type program to really allow others who are receiving services to hear someone's recovery journey, to hear that narrative of recovery and what it took and some of the challenges that the person was able to overcome and some of the obstacles that the person may have had in front of them and may still be present, but in spite of those obstacles, the person is still taking those small steps. So think about ways your organization can bring in or emphasize others who have gone through the process and who are willing to share that message of recovery. The old system and again, some of the existing services focus on more stabilization and maintenance. So the system is designed to really kind of maintain people where they're at, not focus on helping people advance or move beyond just this idea of complacency and where the person is currently at, and that's okay as long as they're not experiencing significant symptoms. So the system has not done a really good job focusing on services or supports that really move people beyond this stabilization and maintenance. So SAMHSA has identified that recovery-oriented care and support systems really are designed to help people with mental and substance use disorders manage their conditions successfully. So SAMHSA has also identified that they define recovery as this process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. So this is what the definition of recovery is. According to SAMHSA, again, others have different definitions, but this might be one that people have had input around and are sort of using at the moment. Again, not saying that there are other definitions that aren't as useful or current, but so if this is the case, then yet recovery services are inconsistently provided. A new paper just came out that talks about recovery-oriented trainings and services and why these are so inconsistently provided. And a lot of it has to do with some of the training models that aren't focused on really helping staff learn skills. It's, again, more about knowledge, but these recovery services need to be more consistently provided. And there are some frameworks available to help us look at what is useful to be present in a recovery-oriented system. And some of those are here. So the 4 dimensions that SAMHSA identifies that support recovery have to do with health, home, purpose, and community. So SAMHSA identifies these 4 dimensions, and as we review each dimension, again, consider how you and your organization support these 4 areas, and in what specific ways have you provided services and resources to help individuals receiving services access these 4 dimensions that are supportive of recovery. So what specifically do you provide to help someone manage their physical health, or identify safe and stable living environments, or find purpose in life, like having a job or starting or returning to school? How do you help facilitate meaningful social and community involvement, like, again, voting and getting a driver's license? These 4 dimensions are critical in supporting recovery, yet often services aren't focusing on them, or they're not focusing on them in a holistic way. So someone's health might be a focus at the expense of helping that person find purpose, or linking them with supports in the community, or identifying relationships in the community. So I think it's important for us as a system to really look at how can we as providers begin guiding our services, and what can we use to help us in our practice better promote recovery and help people access these 4 dimensions, or these 4 areas that really do promote recovery. If you think about your own lives and think about how you feel. I know that if I'm not feeling emotionally or physically healthy, my success is compromised. Again, if I find that there's no purpose in what I'm doing, or I'm socially disconnecting with my community or supports, again, I feel like my success in certain areas is greatly diminished. And I don't just mean success in terms of school or work. I mean success in just feeling well and feeling healthy and feeling positive. So think about your own, these dimensions as they relate to your own lives, and how that impacts how these, when they are present, how much fuller and more maybe committed to whatever your purpose is in life you might be feeling. So SAMHSA has identified these 10 guiding principles, and again, depending on your field and what your background is, you probably have guiding principles for that. There's certainly a list of guiding principles for psychiatric rehabilitation, and a lot of these overlap with some of those other guiding principles. But let's look through each of these and begin thinking about ways that you can begin applying these principles in your own organizations or in your own practice. So when we think about hope, that really is something that is critical and essential for really sending that message to someone that there is the option for a better future. People can recover, people can move into settings and situations and overcome challenges and barriers. And hope can be fostered by your family, by peers, providers. Thinking about ways that we can help people develop hope is, again, bringing in individuals who have maybe gone through your services or who have received certain treatments or services from your organization, and providing opportunities for current individuals receiving services to hear that message of recovery from people who have maybe moved on or moved beyond your services. When we think about the principle of many pathways, we also want to really be mindful of the fact that people have unique talents and unique strengths, and there may be opportunities and options for people to use these varied and unique strengths, capacities, and talents in ways that we can facilitate. So if someone is really good at art, or if someone has a keen interest in music, helping that person develop those skills, or helping that person really harness that motivation in that area can really be beneficial towards their recovery. So really helping to develop opportunities to explore preferences, interests, and so on. It really does focus on being person-centered or person-driven. So helping the person understand that they are controlling the services. They're the ones leading the treatment, and identifying ways that you can step back in that expert role and try to allow the person to take on the role of expert in their own treatment decisions. Again, peer support, whether you have formal peer providers within your organization, or if it's more, or if it's a less formal opportunity that people have to interact with peers, but that peer support is so critical. Holistic, so helping the person really look at all aspects. So if we think about the wellness circle, so if we think about the different dimensions of wellness, thinking about how occupational wellness might in fact impact emotional wellness and physical wellness. So thinking about the person holistically is really important. Being culturally sensitive and mindful. So again, what does your organization do, or what are you doing to be attentive to culture and be mindful of how culture might impact someone's treatment or rehabilitation? Trauma is addressed. So recognizing that people may have gone through trauma. Trauma is very much a part of individuals who are in service provision. There's a high level of trauma associated with individuals with mental health conditions, and addressing that trauma and recognizing that trauma exists. Again, focusing on the strengths of the person, looking at what the person is good at, what skills do they have, what types of strengths can be helpful to use in careers, or use to find housing, or whatever that might be. And ultimately helping that person develop relationships, or involving individuals in that person's life, helping that person reconnect, if possible, to family or other loved ones, identifying ways that the person can really begin developing those relations and other supports. And ideally, as with every service, should be based on respect, and recognizing that the person who is receiving services is the one with the expert view of their own treatment. Oftentimes, they're the ones that we should be listening to. Certainly the experts and psychiatrists and therapists and clinicians will have some information to provide that's relevant to their position, but hearing and better understanding where the person's coming from and respecting their view is really instrumental in guiding your practice. And it's particularly if you want to create services that are more recovery oriented. So let's use the chat box or the Q&A to briefly talk about what are barriers to recovery. So identify a barrier that you've seen in your work related to recovery or recovery oriented services. So think about something that in your practice, in the services that you provide in your organization, what are some of the barriers to recovery? Okay, so it looks like transportation and employment, minimal to no natural supports, financial, the lack of natural supports, absolutely. I think a lot of people may not have those natural supports in their lives, those family members, those other individuals who are naturally part of our lives. Transportation is a big one, and it's interesting. Transportation has been such a barrier in my work in employment services. If you lived in Newark or if you lived in southern rural New Jersey, it seems like transportation is a big problem, whether it's in an urban or suburban or rural setting. Poverty and poor coping skills. Peer facilitator talks about family and transportation, a negative environment. So if we think back to what we can do and what are some of those promoters or facilitators of recovery, and home was one of those, having a safe, stable environment. So helping people to identify opportunities, if possible, to move into more safe and stable. So someone wanted to say that stabilization and maintenance level of service refers to crisis maintenance and prevent additional crises, not maintaining clients in the status quo. It's very short term as well. Absolutely. So there might be times when a crisis needs to be stabilized. I absolutely agree with that. Social stigmas, feelings of inadequacy due to lack of employment opportunities and education, affordable housing. So a lot of these barriers, social supports, really do go back to some of those key facilitators of recovery, those dimensions that have been found to really support recovery. So what can we do as providers to address some of these barriers? What can we do as practitioners? So let's think about this question, and you can throw it in the chat box. What's one thing that you can do in the next month to facilitate recovery at your organization or in your practice? So just one thing, and this month might be sort of an unusual month just because of the holidays, but think about over the next month or over the next month or two. Okay, so help someone link to appropriate referrals that can meet the needs. So that might be an employment support service or a supported education service or supportive housing. What's something else over the next month that someone can do? Thank you, Sylvia. Encourage leisure interest, absolutely. So if we think about looking at the person in a holistic way, really helping to encourage those leisure interests, and that may result in that person identifying either social opportunities or employment opportunities, or even a career that they may want to go back to school for. Support clients in identifying their goals and what brings them joy, absolutely. Individual steps to recovery. So yes, individualize. So help that person identify their own unique steps to recovery. Advocate for safe, affordable housing in our community. We can't expect recovery outside a safe living environment. Absolutely, Violetta. I agree. I think that providers and also individuals receiving services can advocate for safe and affordable housing. Tatiana talks about more communication and outreach, and some clients need education. I think, Gwendolyn, you might be suggesting education in terms of formal education to allow for better employment opportunities or more career-oriented options. Absolutely. So helping people connect with educational settings or different technical educational settings. Yes, thank you, Gwendolyn. So you kind of get the gist. Advocate within public schools, many adults who were never given support during school. Yes, Elizabeth, so thinking about early on, how can we as mental health providers use our services and skills to help advocate within the public schools, within the more secondary school system? What can we do as providers? Maybe your organization has some sort of relationship with the school system and allows the counselors to go in and maybe talk a little bit about mental health and provide some opportunities for teachers and counselors within the school system to identify ways to really help students with mental health conditions. Stasia, use individual's name versus client, consumer, etc., to humanize and focus on recovery. Absolutely. That was one thing I meant to cover, and I don't know how it slipped off, but using just person-first language consistently, using the person's name, not using outdated labels and language to talk about people. Again, there's been such a debate in the field about consumer or client or individual served. You're absolutely right, using the person's name. And that was one thing that Pat Deegan talked about in her writings about recovery, that at the root of recovery is really treating a person as a human being. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that kind of sums up what recovery is, and really recognizing that we've all gone through catastrophic, to some extent, events in our lives, and we have been able to focus on skills and resources to get beyond that. Leonard, yes, discuss how you can help. So allow the person the opportunity to hear some of the things that you can provide, how you can help. What are some tools and techniques you might be able to use to help the person? Absolutely. So we're about 10 minutes out, so I was hoping to save some time for Q&A.
So thank you, Joni. I wanted to just step back in here and help facilitate some Q&A time. So I want to encourage all the participants to type any questions that they have. I see there is one question in the Q&A, which I'll get to in just a second here. But any others who also have questions, please feel free to either type it in the Q&A box or in the chat box, any questions you have for Joni. I wanted to start off just, I had so many thoughts as you were presenting, Joni, and as the other participants were sharing some of the things that people can do, that they can do, and that others can do to try to help facilitate recovery. And I wanted to add one of my own, if that's okay.
Yes.
And the one that I think is so critically important is, and you got at this, but making sure that what's being focused on in services and supports are personally meaningful goals. So really talking to the individual. Somebody did mention it. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly here. Oh, what Kayla said, support clients in identifying their goals and what brings them joy. And I think, that idea of really talking to the individual about what brings them joy, what brings them happiness, where do they want to go, what do they enjoy, and then identifying goals around that. Because a lot of the other things that sometimes we focus on, coping skills, taking care of themselves, physically taking care of their environment, maybe taking medication, all of those kinds of things. I'd like to say that those aren't really goals in and of themselves. They're tools that help people reach their goals. And so I think if the goal is something that's really meaningful to the person, other things, they'll do other things or work on developing other skills that are necessary to ultimately achieve the goal that has meaning to them. When the interim steps are focused on as the goal, I think it's much harder to kind of muster motivation for that. So talking to people about what they really want and what's really important to them, I think is critically important, and sometimes hasn't happened for a long time. And so there might need to be a process of even helping the person identify what those things are. So I think that's something that's really important too.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head that oftentimes those goals are not dictated by the person. They are identified by either the provider or family members or other people in the person's life. So yes, having those personally meaningful goals really come from the person and helping that person identify what they are. And I think a couple of the people in the chat got to that by listening to someone's interest and helping to facilitate discussions about what brings joy in people's life. I love that statement. So someone just added into the chat, all clients need education and tech awareness. For our clients to succeed in the current world, they need to be able to function as is, and for that education is necessary for every member in some form of way, whether it's computer skills, social media, or how to check transportation times via phone, having simple communication tools and email. Absolutely. Technology is part of our everyday world, whether we like it or not, and really helping people to hone those skills or develop those skills certainly is helpful.
So there's also a question in the Q&A about people with criminal backgrounds and also medical diagnoses. So individuals who might have more complicated backgrounds who have additional barriers, often related to the stigma, and feeling like there's little hope for them to sort of move forward because of judgment, limited opportunities, limited support. So, I'm wondering your thoughts on that, Joni. That sort of makes me think about another thought I had while you were presenting around illness identity. So I'm wondering if you can address a little bit individuals who might have, more complicated situations, multiple stigmas they may be experiencing, and how that might impact how they see themselves and what they may feel they're able to do.
Absolutely. I think that when people have these compounding barriers, whether it's a criminal background on top of other barriers or obstacles, it certainly is difficult and can perpetuate this illness identity and this feeling that I'm just someone who's living day by day to overcome these challenges and obstacles. But I think if we go back to some of what those common themes in the recovery autobiographical perspectives were, and looking at those small steps, so helping someone develop small goals, achievable goals, goals that the person is likely to achieve. So it might be picking up an application, it might be looking into organizations that help individuals with criminal backgrounds get jobs. And there are places, I know our One Stop Career Center here that's funded through, yes, and would you like to you can certainly answer the question. I just wanted to finish my thought. The One Stop Career Center here has individuals who are designated to work with folks who have criminal backgrounds or justice involvement. So they have opportunities available with employers who are willing to hire individuals. So even helping the person identify a list of resources that could be useful. Yes, and would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just indicating that we were answering it live. I wasn't trying to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. But I did have a comment. I think one of the other things that might be helpful, because I think for a lot of people with those compounding circumstances, it really is a lack of hope that they experience because they feel they're always going to be judged. And so I think this is another opportunity where peers can play a really important role. So having somebody else who maybe has had some similar challenges, multiple challenges related to their background or their health conditions, criminal involvement, who have been able to go forward and be successful. I think, connecting with somebody who has been able to be successful is so powerful. So I think that can be another way to try and facilitate, building some hope among those individuals.
Absolutely. So we have about 2 minutes left if anyone has additional questions or comments. I'll review some of the resources really quickly. So this first resource, Power to You, is the Recovery Empowerment Center, or the National Empowerment Center, Dan Fisher, and has lots of excellent resources about recovery. And the second one is related to SAMHSA in a quick little brief handout that is, again, handy to use and kind of outlines all of those principles we just talked about. They also have other brochure type handouts too that you might want to have around your organization and agency in your office to send that message of hope and that expectation that you believe that people can recover. So we have 2 more chats. Just thanking for the information. Absolutely. If we don't have any other information, here's our contact slide. Anne and Kati will be sending the slides out, so you'll have all of this information with you. Oh, we have 1 more chat. Let's see. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
So thank you again, Joni, for the presentation, and thank you to all our participants. We appreciate your attendance here. Look for our email with the link to the survey and also the slides. And as I mentioned, we'll also be posting the recording and the slides on our website if you'd like to share it with others. And please consider some of our upcoming webinars. Those were posted in the chat as well. We'll also include those in our follow-up email. And we really appreciate it, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful holiday time coming up. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.